You might think this space race was all about science and exploration, but really, at its core, it was the ultimate showdown of the Cold War. It was capitalism versus communism, played out not on some dusty battlefield, but in the vast, silent arena of space. This is the story of how two global superpowers, trying to prove who is best on Earth, ended up reaching for the stars.
It all kicked off with a sound, a simple, persistent beep, 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 coming from the sky. On October 4th, 1957, that was the sound of the Soviet Union's Sputnik 1. And for America, this wasn't a celebration of science, it was an alarm bell. Because, if the Soviets could put a metal ball in orbit over your head, they could also put a nuclear warhead there. Just like that, the starting gun had been fired. The space race was on.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this incredible story. We'll start in the rubble of World War II, see how the Soviets just dominated the early years, then watch America make an audacious comeback. We'll cover the heartbreaking tragedies, the incredible triumphs, and finally, the surprising ways this race still affects you and me every single day.
To really get this, we've got to rewind to the end of World War II. The key piece of tech here, the big liquid-fueled rocket, was basically invented by Nazi Germany for their V-2 weapon. So when the war ended, both the US and the Soviets scrambled like mad to grab not just the leftover rockets, but the real prize, the German engineers who knew how to build them. That scramble basically set the stage for everything that came next.
And this whole race really comes down to two guys, two absolute giants. For the Americans, you had Wernher von Braun, who became the public face of NASA, a real celebrity scientist. On the Soviet side, there was Sergei Korolev. This man was a genius, but his identity was a state secret. He was only ever called the chief designer. Get this, he'd survived one of Stalin's gulags to run their entire space program. So you've got these two brilliant minds with wildly different stories locked in this epic technological duel. And this is the really crucial part to understand. Every time one of these magnificent rockets launched, the world saw a peaceful scientific mission. But what the military strategists saw was something much scarier. A rocket that can put a satellite into orbit is the exact same rocket that can drop a hydrogen bomb on the other side of the planet. So yeah, every single launch was a public test of an ICBM. The race to space and the arms race were two sides of the same coin. So, with Sputnik, the Soviets are first out of the gate. And for the next few years, man, they didn't just lead the race, they absolutely dominated it. America was completely flat-footed, just stunned and scrambling to keep up with this nonstop parade of Soviet firsts that totally captivated the world. And they were just relentless. I mean, check this out. A month after Sputnik, boom, they send the first living creature into orbit, a dog named Laika. Then in '61, the big one, the first human in space, Yuri Gagarin. Then the first woman. They even landed the first probe on the moon. Each of these was a huge propaganda win, a way to tell the world, see, our system is better. Picture this. April 12, 1961. Yuri Gagarin is sitting in his tiny capsule. As the massive rockets light up beneath him, he doesn't deliver some grand formal speech. He just coolly says, "Poyakali," which basically means, let's go. And for 108 minutes, he orbited the Earth, becoming an instant global hero. That one simple phrase became the motto for the whole space age. So by 1961, let's be honest, America is getting hammered. Gagarin's flight was a huge blow to national pride. So the new president, John F. Kennedy, does something brilliant. He realizes that trying to beat the Soviets at their own game, this sprint for firsts, is a losing strategy. So he decides to just change the rules of the game completely. Kennedy goes before Congress and makes this insane, unbelievably bold promise. He says America is going to put a man on the moon and bring him home safely before the end of the decade. Now, think about how crazy this was. At the time, America's longest spaceflight was just 15 minutes. Kennedy basically moved the finish line from a 100-yard dash to an ultramarathon on another world, betting that America's industrial might could win in the long run. But you can't just aim for the moon and hope for the best. You have to learn how to actually fly in space first. That's what Project Gemini was all about. It was the crucial and honestly often overlooked training program. This is where astronauts learned all the hard stuff, how to do a spacewalk, how to fly two ships in formation, and the really tricky one, how to dock them together. Without Gemini, there's no way Apollo could have happened. But this quest for the moon wasn't just about glory and guts. It was incredibly dangerous.
As things ramped up, both sides were pushing their technology and their people to the absolute breaking point. And they were both about to learn, in very different ways, that the price of ambition could be tragically high.
And how each country dealt with failure tells you everything. In the US, there was the Apollo 1 fire. A flash fire in the cockpit during a routine test on the ground killed 3 astronauts. It was a national tragedy out in the open. But what happened next was key. NASA stopped everything. They investigated publicly, found the flaws, and rebuilt the spacecraft to be much, much safer. Meanwhile, the Soviets were having their own secret catastrophe. Their giant N-1 moon rocket just kept blowing up on the launch pad. One explosion was one of the biggest non-nuclear blasts ever. But nobody knew. They just covered it up, and the program died in secret. The American system learned from its failure. The Soviet system buried its. So, rising from the ashes of the Apollo 1 fire, a stronger, safer American program emerged, totally laser-focused on Kennedy's goal. With the Soviet moon program literally blowing up in secret, the stage was set. An army of 400,000 people had been working towards this one single moment. The climax of the space race was finally here. On July 16th, the ground shook as the massive Saturn V rocket climbed into the sky. 4 days later, after a heart-stopping final descent where Neil Armstrong had to take manual control to avoid a crater, his voice crackled over the radio. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." A few hours after that, he took that famous first step. And on July 24th, they splashed down safely back home. It was just a perfect mission. And then came the moment the entire world had been waiting for. An estimated 650 million people, the biggest TV audience in history, were glued to their grainy black and white screens. They watched a ghostly figure descend a ladder and step onto the moon. And Neil Armstrong's words? Just perfect. He somehow captured the insane scale of it all, turning a Cold War victory into a moment for all of us. And this is where the Americans played it so smart. Yeah, of course they planted the American flag, but they also left something else behind, a small plaque on the leg of the lunar lander. It didn't say America won. It said, "We came in peace for all mankind." That one line was a stroke of genius. It reframed the whole thing, not as a conquest, but as an achievement for all of humanity. So, America gets to the moon. Race over, right? Well, not exactly. The story wasn't quite finished, and the rivalry between the two superpowers was about to take a very surprising turn. The legacy of this fierce competition was about to shift from conflict to cooperation, and it would change our lives in ways nobody saw coming. I mean, you go from the highest of highs with Apollo 11 to the absolute terror of Apollo 13 less than a year later. An explosion crippled their spacecraft halfway to the moon. The landing was off. This was now a desperate fight for survival. And that famous, unbelievably calm call from the cockpit, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here," kicked off one of the greatest rescue missions in history. They literally used the lunar module as a lifeboat and jerry-rigged solutions with duct tape and cardboard to get home. An amazing, successful failure. Then, in 1975, something happened that would have seemed impossible just a decade earlier. The political tensions had eased a bit, and these two bitter rivals decided to work together. An American Apollo spacecraft flew up and docked with a Soviet Soyuz capsule. The hatches opened, and the commanders met in the middle and shook hands. In space. That handshake was the symbolic end of the space race, and it opened the door for everything that came after, like the International Space Station. Okay, so this is all cool history, but why does it matter to you? Well, you're literally surrounded by the technology created for this race. The camera sensor in your smartphone, its ancestor was designed for space probes. That comfy memory foam mattress, developed for astronaut seats. Cordless power tools, scratch-resistant glasses, even advanced water filters. So much of the stuff we use every single day is a direct spin-off from the push to get to the moon. But maybe the most important thing we got from the space race wasn't a piece of tech at all. It was a change in how we see ourselves. For the first time, photos like Earthrise, taken from lunar orbit, showed us our home. Not as a map with borders, but as a tiny, fragile, beautiful blue marble hanging in the dark. It's a feeling astronauts call the overview effect. And that perspective of one shared planet arguably did more to shape our modern world than any rocket. So the original race between two superpowers is over, no doubt. But look around today. You've got new nations and even private companies aiming for the moon and Mars. Which leaves us with a pretty interesting question to think about. Has the competition in space really ended? Or has it just evolved into something new, with a whole new cast of characters and maybe even higher stakes?